As the festive season in India begins, we're starting to see a lot of action in the market from a lot of brands. One of them has been on the periphery of the market for the longest time, and it has now come out with a couple of product innovations. But we're not here to discuss the product itself, we're here to talk about the brand, and that brand is Nissan. Girish, you were there at the Magnite AMT drive recently. They've also come out with the Kuro edition. So, while you've driven the cars and gotten a feel for it, what's the message that you're seeing with Nissan right now? Where is Nissan India placed at the moment?
So first of all, it was good to go back to a Nissan event after a really long time. That was one of the things on my agenda. While the Magnite has been around for a long time, I just wanted to know what is the kind of message that they want to put out. Well, Nissan has been one of the brands that I say has gone through a very rough patch in the last couple of years. They've not been able to add any models to their portfolio, but they have been around. If you look at the Magnite itself, Magnite has been doing a steady sales number of around 2 to 3,000 right from the time it started towards the end of December 2020, helped with a fantastic start thanks to the price. Despite a steady inflow of new models and a lot of cars from different brands in that segment, somehow they have been able to sustain with that number. Partly also helped by the fact that the sub 4 meter SUV segment is a very important segment in India, and it's seen a lot of interest from customers because of the way it is and because of the way it has evolved. So luckily for Nissan, I think although they are a single model brand right now in India, they are in the right segment, and that is helping them. If they were in some other segment, maybe it would have been tougher. So they made a good, sensible choice by being in that segment with that one brand. But there are things planned. I mean, they've announced a lot of things. To be frank, it's a little slow with execution, but they are doing something or the other and being in the eyes, because having people come to the dealership is important. So the Magnite AMT edition again is I think it's a step in the right direction. It may not give them the sort of stupendous volumes that they want, but it will definitely keep the Magnite in hand.
One of the questions I think a lot of people have is, as you rightly said, Nissan is a single model brand. So how do brands do that? How does a Nissan survive with just one model that is also not doing exceedingly impressive volumes as such? They've, in the last 3 years, it's just been the Magnite. They had the kicks for a brief while, but that really saw no takers. So how are they doing it? And is it really feasible for them to be able to run this kind of operation?
First of all, it's I don't think they would plan for a single model operation. Okay, it is something that they've got by default, and it's they've ended up into that more by default rather than design. Introducing a new model is always a long drawn process, and they have been through some massive up and down even internationally, which again affects the India operations. But the last 3 years, they have been able to keep, with a single model only, they've been able to keep it in the hunt. Obviously, with the new boss coming in around 3-4 years ago, a lot of things would have changed. But then he has to set some things into motion, and it will take some time for that effect to come through. We are looking at some new models coming in next year. They've showcased some international models because Nissan as a brand is steeped in history. They have a large portfolio of models. And I'm sure they will be wanting to get those models into India. It's a slow process. It's not easy for them because in India, they're also in a partnership with Renault. So they share a factory with Renault. So it's a lot of complicated process. It's not the ideal situation to be in. But considering the kind of backing they have, I think that will help them stay afloat more.
But why are they slow? The models that you mentioned, they did a showcase, right, in 2022, saying that we are just evaluating these and we're going to come out with these. We're almost at the end of 2023 now, and there's no sight of these models. So why are they so slow as such? From when you look at it from the outside, it seems that they're taking forever to make these decisions.
So I think it's relative. When you say slow, it's because you have a very Indian mindset, and we kind of tend to do things fast. If you're in an Indian company, it would have been much faster. It's a Japanese company, so they work a little slow. I mean, their pace is generally a bit more time spent on planning, understanding the market, and trying to understand whether the advice that they're getting from their Indian counterparts is actually what they want to do. So the process sort of is much slower than it would have been in any Indian company. I think if you look at, say, Maruti Suzuki, although it's a Japanese-owned company, but it's very Indian, just because of the way they are. But Nissan is still a Japanese company, so a Japanese company in Seoul. So they still function that way, and that is why they are a little slow. Specifically about the models that they showcased last year, I think the plan was to get them out rolling by now, at least one of it. I think the X-Trail was planned, what has happened is, as far as I know from my sources, is that they tried to localize some things on the X-Trail, which meant that the Japanese guys had to go back and they said, okay, fine, we're going to test this right from the beginning, and that is sort of delayed it.
On that note, you mentioned that there is a difference in terms of culture, right? They're a Japanese company at heart, and they want to do things the way they do it, rightly. From a product point of view, I feel that they've never quite been able to capture the pulse of the Indian market. They've had their moments. The Micra, the Sunny had amazing recall in those days. But even those weren't products that really changed the game for Nissan as such. So what was it that they got right with those two models? Because of course you've extensively driven those as well, so you have a perspective on what those products were like, and what have they not been able to do in the years that have passed since.
So I think you rightly pointed out that when anyone invests into any model, one thing is the product itself, the other is the brand, and that's equally important. There are a lot of times where the brand is the deal breaker and not the product. With models like Micra and Sunny, they were fairly good. I think they were reasonably well. There were better options also. Okay, it's not like they were the best in the segment, but also whether people wanted to invest in the brand, because brand building is also very important, and that's something maybe Nissan needs to look at, very proactively right now, because it's a phenomenal brand. I mean, it's a brand steeped in history.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about cars that we as kids would have loved, and the GTR would be there. It's a Nissan. We talk about a Nissan petrol SUV. So it is. I mean, it is right up there with the best brands. Just that in India, we've not seen the best of Nissan. I guess you would also be aware, a lot of products, whether they are Nissan. So all those things are there.
Just talking about the origins of the Magnite, I have a feeling that the Datsun venture was more of an expensive distraction at all, if at all, because otherwise there was no positive outcome of having a spin-off budget brand as such. The Datsun models themselves never really lived up to their potential. So in essence, then the Datsun experiment, if we can call it that, because it barely lasted a few years. It didn't really add anything to Nissan's brand value or image in the long run. If anything, I feel it took a little bit away from them.
All right, I think it was a bit of too much of a distraction for the brand that was already not that well established. I mean, if you have a well established brand and you bring something new, then it is easier for the people who are working behind it, because the team was more or less the same. For example, if you look at Maruti, as established as a brand can get in India, then they added Nexa, which was like a brand new chain, and they did a fairly good job of it. I think if Nissan was much more well established and well entrenched in the Indian market, Datsun would have been an easier sell. But here the problem was that you're trying to sell a Nissan, you're convincing someone for a Nissan, but you're also not trying to convince them for a brand new brand. So I think that was asking too much from the people who are working on it. I think it was also a question of timing of the Datsun brand in India, because it came at a time when everything was moving into aspirational segment with India, and Indians wanted everything that would be more aspirational, richer, more luxurious. And somehow you have a brand that talks about frugality and basics and very affordable or cheap, that sort of a thing. So it never really clicked. And I think Nissan also realized that very quickly. If you see, there was a stark difference in terms of just the product between the Datsun Go and the Ready Go. A Ready Go would have also been a fairly decent start for them. So, and then they've just Of course, now it's a different story that the brand doesn't exist anymore. It's unfortunate because the Datsun brand itself, again, had a lot of history. Not many brands have history associated with it, but Datsun had it. And probably if they had positioned it as something more fun, maybe it would have worked.
Those cars, they were somewhat in the vein of the Toyota Etios and Etios Liva, which were very capable, very tailored to Indian requirements and needs, but they weren't aspirational. You wouldn't get inside one of those and say, hey, this is game changing. I would love to be in this car every day. That wasn't the feeling. I feel like that's also what Datsun did with those products. But the issue there was that somehow Datsun was never even able to convince people to come in and take a look at those cars, because by the end, the numbers that they were doing were abysmal. And Toyotas did actually end up selling quite a lot of.
Because the brand is so strong. If like, for example, if some other brand had, some well-established brand had probably tried a Go or a Go Plus, would have done better numbers. You're trying to convince the customer about a brand, then you're trying to convince them on the product. It's just a it's very difficult situation to be in. But I think also the problem was that what usually happens is you have some preconceived notions about what a market is all about. I think both brands suffered from that. This is my understanding, that maybe there was a preconceived notion about what Indians want, and or what Indians need, rather than what Indians want. And according to them, according to the needs of the Indians, these cars would have been perfect, but they didn't want it.
But then how is it that these brands pay so much attention, focus so keenly on things that they believe would be crucial to buyers in India, and then get it so wrong?
Honestly, I wouldn't have a straight answer for that as such, but I think there's multiple reasons why that happens, and it can't be just the product. The product, of course, has a big part in success or failure. But for example, if you consider a movie, you may say that either the script is not right, or the acting is not right, or the direction is not right. There are a lot of times when the movie is fantastic, but it still bombs because the marketing is not right. So there are a lot of reasons for something to click and something not to click, I guess. Or it's just that the movie is ahead of its time, which we've seen a lot of times. There are movies you find cult, as you feel that these are classic movies, but they never did well when they were released. So it's in a different time. So that can be the reason. But yeah, I mean, I think as a brand, maybe if Nissan would bring a lot of interesting brands. I mean, a lot of brands that Nissan has in its global portfolio.
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't you like to see them in India?
Yeah, would be great. Would be great to have an Infinity or something on.
I mean, you're talking about the luxury brand.
Yeah,
but again,
yeah.
that is one additional
It's some
thing.
variety. It's some variety which Nissan doesn't have right now, and even Datsun was, like I said, at best half-hearted. They never really put any real thought into making the brand fun and aspirational as such.
But I think that was a global mandate.
That was the global mandate.
They wanted it for the.
If you would look at some of the cars that they sold in Russia and in some of the other markets, you would grimace, because those were really, really archaic. So, but that's the thing. I don't think it's impossible for a brand to come in without having a very good, strong recall in the Indian market. We've seen MG do it, right? MG was never here, but the way they came in, they had this massive fan base in no time at all, selling a Hector, which we know has Chinese origins. So they've shown that it's possible, but somehow Nissan wasn't able to do the same thing.
I think there were a lot of things happening at Nissan at around the same time, even globally. It's very important for a multinational brand that from the headquarters they have very straightforward direction and an agenda that this is the plan that we have. And somehow Nissan never got it, is what I feel. But it looks like they're now settling in. Like I for the longest time always thought that Nissan can be the next Maruti Suzuki, but I mean, it hasn't. But does it have the potential? Yes, it does. Or at least the Toyota, if not Maruti Suzuki, they could be somewhere there.
The alliance has been in turmoil for quite a few years now, with everything that happened with Carlos Ghosn, and it's had quite an impact on Nissan as well, if you look at it, because it seems like for a duration there, they were completely frozen. They were not able to act in the market or show any kind of speed or urgency in addressing the gaps that exist in the market as such. I feel like they were brought down a lot by that. Not just because of what happened with Carlos Ghosn, but what happened with Carlos Ghosn's fleeing Japan. That also played a big part, right? Because it happened in Japan.
Yeah, it was a very sensational thing, but I think that was just one of the reasons. I mean, even after that, there have been a lot of ups and downs, and they were trying to figure out how the management should function. Eventually, now they have got a board of independent directors who sort of talk about compliance and see how where it is going to go and how the company is going to work ahead. So it's a very different sort of thing. But all these things, what happens is in the consumer's mind also, it creates some questions, as to what the brand is up to, and whether we should be investing in the brand. Are they doing it? So are they doing it right? The product flow, I don't think would have been affected that much. They Because that's a separate department working on it, of course, but it would have slowed them down even more than what they should have, because obviously everyone is waiting for key decisions to be made, and do they have the right person doing it? And compliance is such a big issue, so no one would want to mess around with that. Yeah, so that has been a sort of tough time for Nissan, and it had its repercussions in India as well, in terms of whether the decisions for what products need to come to India, whether they were taken on time, whether the green lighting was done on time. So it would have slowed them down for sure, especially at a time when all the other manufacturers are just gunning for it.
Partnerships now are so key in the automotive sphere. We are seeing everybody teaming up. So in that sense, it seems to go it alone is probably not feasible. But do you think, in a way, the alliance sort of weighs Nissan down a little bit? Because since they've come together, of course, they've had economies of scale. They share this massive factory in India, so they have that advantage. But I've always felt there's been that lack of balance in that relationship. It's always been Renault on top and Nissan following next, as as less of a priority. It doesn't seem that the focus has ever been on Nissan in the alliance itself. It's always been more centered towards Renault.
Yeah, I hope the Renault guys also think that way and not the other way around. It's grass is always greener on the other side. I think there are. I'm sure working in a joint venture company like Renault Nissan it must be a complicated process, because like all corporates, there are a lot of these compliance issues and a lot of protocols that need to be followed. And now you have two brands coming together, and you need to follow protocols for both brands.
And the cultural differences as well, French and Japan.
Yes, cultural differences as well. I think that also plays a very important part. So in terms of manufacturing or economies of scale, it definitely helps, because if they were alone, then imagine with those kind of volumes, whether they would be able to develop products or get partners on board in terms of suppliers. It would have been a challenge. That is not the case now, because automatically it gets doubled because they have two brands working on it. So that's an advantage. And also the pressure on making sure that the suppliers get their business again will be lesser on one brand, because both brands are to be equally party to it. There are some plus and minuses, and I think the one good thing that they did was they let go of the badge engineering bit, and they said, okay, let us make products which are genuinely as different as possible, and that always works. I mean, you can look at Hyundai and Kia. The amount of differences that you see in two brands which are more or less the same is phenomenal, and that's obviously the benchmark. I think both Renault and Nissan are pretty close, and I think they're doing a better job than probably maybe Volkswagen and Skoda does in that sense.
Right. Overall, when you look at what Nissan is pitching even now, so okay, they have a single model. They're saying that they're working on a few other things. They've got the X-Trail. I believe they've spoken about a C SUV, which they're working on. Then they're also looking at some EVs. But the thing is, whatever they're promising right now, everything is on paper. So firstly, we don't know when these products will arrive. By the time they arrive, is there a risk that it's probably a little too late for them to have any meaningful impact as such?
No, I think, see, if they have a steady flow of models, and if they are going to be relevant at that time. Now, obviously, when they're developing products, is always for the future. So we're hoping that they know that what are the kind of features and what are going to be the requirements of a customer, say in 2 years' time when the products start coming in. Their bigger focus, and that is actually one of their core strengths, is with electric, because Nissan as a brand was one of the first ones to go electric. and they will have that sort of learning, and they can probably do wonders with it. So at least for the next 10-15 years, they could have a slight upper hand than someone who's just trying to get into electric and trying to understand what the ecosystem is all about. And with electric, we've seen that people are ready to try new things, try new brands, take a bit of risk anyways. So it's going to be. I don't think they should be. Of course, it doesn't mean that it's going to be all easy.
And it's not going to be guaranteed success.
Yes,
right?
it's not going to be guaranteed success. But I think if they start delivering the products, I think Nissan should be okay.
Well, we hope you enjoyed watching that conversation. It was pretty insightful for me too, to be able to pick Girish's brain on what Nissan has not been able to do right and what it should be doing going forward. Let us know what you thought of this conversation, if you would like us to cover any more topics going forward. And remember to follow Car and Bike and hit the bell icon if you haven't done so already.